This video is going to talk about chemical properties. By the end of this video, you should be able to describe two examples of chemical properties, explain what happens during a chemical change, and distinguish between a physical and chemical change. Let's look at chemical properties. A chemical property is the ability for matter to change into a new substance. So for example, if we have a tree and we burn this tree, that burn turns into ash. That ash is a completely different substance than the original tree. This chemical change is called flammability. Now, there's another type of chemical change that we've talked about, and that's reactivity. Reactivity is mixing two substances together and having some sort of chemical reaction, say some baking soda, here's baking soda, and we're going to pour in some vinegar, and it's going to bubble up and fizz out. That's reactivity. So those are two examples of different chemical properties. If we were to compare physical and chemical properties, a physical property does not change the substance. So for example, if we have this nail, and we took the nail and we bent it, that bent nail, nothing about the nail itself changed the property or the substance of the nail. Instead, it's just bent. So the physical property doesn't actually change the nail. Now let's say we left that nail outside for a long time in the rain. That nail's going to rust. That rust is a chemical change. Not a physical change, but a chemical change, because the substance itself actually changed. It went from some sort of steel to a rusted metal. Chemical properties are a lot more difficult to observe. So if you were to mix baking soda and vinegar, that chemical property that has changed that substance is a little bit harder to observe. A chemical change is when one or more substances is changed into a new substance, and they have new and different properties. And this actually happens a lot in your daily life that you may not even realize. Take, for example, a battery. Every time you use a battery, you're producing some sort of chemical change. The chemical inside the battery is producing an energy. That's why batteries eventually will wear out, because the chemical inside of it dries out and no longer works. Your body is constantly going through chemical change. As you eat and your food is being digested, that's a chemical change. It's taking the substance that you're putting into your body and it's creating a new substance that comes out. Some other example of chemical changes. When you decide that you want to bake a cake or bake some cookies, say, let's bake a birthday cake here. That is a chemical change. When you are baking the cake, you smell the cake. That odor indicates that there are chemical changes taking place. When you heat something up, when it foams, if the color changes, when you make cookies and they start out a very light tan color and the longer they bake, the darker they turn, those are all chemical changes. Chemical changes are hard to reverse, if not impossible. Once you've baked a cookie, it is impossible to turn it back into the flour and the eggs and the baking soda and the sugar that you put in there. So chemical changes typically don't reverse. So let's take a look at physical versus chemical changes. How do you know what kind of change it is? Well, the composition of an object is the type of matter that makes up the object and the way that the matter is arranged in the object. And this composition can tell you whether it's a physical or a chemical change. For example, if you take baking soda and you grind it up into a finer powder than it already is, that's just a physical change because it hasn't changed the composition of the substance. But if you add vinegar to it, then it becomes a chemical change because you've actually changed that substance. Another example would be water. if you were to do electrolysis, that is going to physically and chemically alter the water. Electrolysis breaks the oxygen and the hydrogen atoms apart so that you have two completely different substances. That is a chemical change once that is completed. Taking a look back at the objectives, are you able to describe two examples of chemical properties? The two examples would be flammability and reactivity. Can you explain what happens during a chemical change? During a chemical change, the substance is chemically altered. The composition of the substance actually changes. And can you distinguish between a physical and a chemical change? In a physical change, the substance is not altered, but a chemical change, it is and turns into a new substance.